Hello everyone, it's Frank Maguire, and this is another episode of Meanwhile back on the podcast. Now, a few months back, to the delight of Star Wars fans, Luke Skywalker made a surprising return in the Season 2 finale of The Mandalorian. As the fans reveled publicly in the return of their favorite moisture farmer who could, Mark Hamill himself took to Twitter to thank the episode's director, Peyton Reed. And the tweet read, "I am so grateful to have been given the unexpected opportunity to revisit my character when he was still a symbol of hope and optimism. Your assured direction and kindness was a crucial element in the experience and means more to me than I can say. Thank you." The fan response to this was immediate. Most of those responses echoed Hamill's sentiments, but some took the opportunity to re-air their grievances with The Last Jedi, and specifically those centered around the characterization of Luke Skywalker by the film's writer-director Rian Johnson. This then of course snowballed into comment sections across the net exploding with debate about The Last Jedi and Johnson's alleged character assassination of Luke Skywalker, and ultimately the sequel trilogy. Some even calling for the sequel trilogy to be erased from the canon or retconned, and that is what we are going to be talking about on this debut episode of Free as a Nerd, so stick with us.
Meanwhile, back on the podcast, four colossal nerds named Saba, Chris, Christina, and Frank have set out to take on a great darkness that has enveloped the world of fandom with their powers of common sense and the strength to take on even the most butthurt Twitter mobs and insufferable comment section trolls. They fight for truth, objectivity, and nuance in the conversation and debate over fictional made-up shit.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this debut episode of Free as a Nerd. Now, Free as a Nerd is going to be a little different from your average Meanwhile episode. Free as a Nerd is going to be the Meanwhile team's outlet for things they want to say and subjects that they want to tackle that may not fit into our panel style episodes. Sort of like the recent episode I did, where I talked about the debut of Ahsoka Tano. And I'll admit, there are a few things I said during that episode that I didn't fully think through, and I really made a few leaps in some of my criticisms. But hey, I'm not perfect. I'm only human, but more importantly, I'm not afraid to be wrong. And if I know I'm wrong, I'm going to be the first guy to say it. Now, let's jump into today's topic. Now, I spent some time in those comment sections that were talking about The Last Jedi and this character assassination of Luke Skywalker. And I definitely made a point of trying to engage in some of the conversations I felt were more civil. But no matter how many rational arguments were made, some fans just wouldn't listen to reason. And the one thing I kept seeing over and over again that I vehemently disagree with was that Rian Johnson is to blame for everything. And this argument was recently reignited as Rian Johnson, only a week or so ago, announced that his Star Wars sequel trilogy is still in development. Most of us assumed that its exclusion from Kathleen Kennedy's presentation during the 2021 Disney Investor Day presentation was some kind of indication that it had mostly likely been canceled. But to my delight, Johnson is going to have another shot in the Lucasfilm sandbox. Now, the question is, are the detractors right? Is Johnson single-handedly responsible for derailing the sequel trilogy? Let's examine that. So first, I think we need to zoom out the timeline a bit to focus on a little more than just The Last Jedi. Let's go back to the early development process, and this is where I think everything really totally goes off the fucking rails. The cast was amazing. I loved everyone's performance, and the special effects, the practical effects. The movie visually really felt like a Star Wars movie. I really feel like J.J. Abrams was emotionally invested in those aspects of the film, and what they ultimately brought to the screen and the franchise was nothing short of amazing. However, I think the major issue everybody seems to glaze over or pay very little mind to is the fact that the executive team never made it a priority to work out the entire arc of the trilogy first. They never got all the directors together, all the writers together in the room and worked out a fully fleshed out story collectively, which is why we got this giant disconnected mess. Now, that isn't the fault of one single director. That is the fault of the producers and the executive team. Now, let's just forget that for a second. Before I get into TFA, The Force Awakens, and how it set us on this path, I would like to share something that I've been thinking since my first watch of the TFA trailer. What is with this rehashed Empire and this rehashed, reskinned rebellion? The Empire was defeated. left in tatters. Why couldn't Star Wars progress beyond this old model? You know, the upstart idealistic freedom fighters versus the jackbooted authoritarian fascists. Yet again, but seriously, there was literally 20 years of Star Wars publishing materials to draw inspiration from to give us a new story, a new setting, some new stakes, and they just reskinned everything and tried to sell it to us as something brand new, and I call bullshit on that. Now, let's unpack J.J. Abrams' Force Awakens, the first film in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Do you remember the crawl of The Force Awakens? Luke Skywalker has vanished. In his absence, the sinister First Order has risen from the ashes of the Empire and will not rest until Skywalker, the Last Jedi, has been destroyed. With the support of the Republic, General Leia Organa leads a brave resistance. So, I want to stop and I want to focus on those opening 4 words in this scroll. Luke Skywalker has vanished. The story literally opens with the audience being told that Luke is gone. Yet, I've seen some Star Wars fans who emphatically argue that it was Rian Johnson who put Luke Skywalker on that island. This should be the unequivocal proof that Johnson had nothing to do with the decision of putting Luke on that island. Now, I want to play this scene from Force Awakens, and then I want to come back and I want to unpack this. So let's take a listen.
Ever since Luke disappeared, people have been looking for him.
Why did he leave?
He was training a new generation of Jedi. One boy, an apprentice, turned against him, destroyed it all. Luke felt responsible. He just walked away from everything.
Do you know what happened to him?
A lot of rumors, stories. People who knew him best think he went looking for the first Jedi temple.
The Jedi were real.
I used to wonder about that myself. Thought it was a bunch of mumbo-jumbo. A magical power holding together good and evil, the dark side and the light. Crazy thing is...
Now this scene, this dialogue between Han, Finn, and Rey not only establishes that Luke vanished, but he suffered a great betrayal, a tragedy. And I think we can infer from this that people died as a result. And Rey's Force vision only reinforces that as we see the temple burning and Luke with R2 looking on. Now, of course, Luke feels guilty. When a student fails a teacher, there's a natural inclination to want to blame themselves. Teachers feel a personal sense of responsibility for their students. And in a scenario where that student is being taught techniques that could effectively make them more dangerous if they didn't know said techniques, and then they use those techniques you taught them to cause harm to others, the teacher is going to feel some sense of complicity in those actions. Now, even though this is a very short scene, we are given a lot, and I think this establishes where Rian would inherit this story. That line where Han says, the people who knew him think he went looking for the first Jedi temple. Now, ask yourself this. Why would Luke seek out the first Jedi temple? Consider this. Could this not possibly be an early indication that Luke was already becoming disenfranchised with the Jedi? Now, I only say this because they make a point of saying the first Jedi temple. Now, granted, I could be totally seeing something where there was nothing. Maybe they've specified it was the first Jedi temple just to make it a little more sexy. But what if saying the first was some kind of subtext that Luke felt it necessary to go there in an attempt to try and make sense of why his nephew succumbed to Snoke, why he gave into the dark side? I think he was going back to the beginning to figure out where everything went wrong. Now, how does this play into the purpose of this episode specifically? How does this help me make my case in defending The Last Jedi and defending Rian Johnson? Well, given that this is really all the audience is given in terms of where Luke is in this new story, it was up to Rian Johnson to continue that through line into the sequel. That is how storytelling works. That is the job of the screenwriter, especially in a sequel scenario. You carry through lines into the next portion of the story. For all of you who continue to crucify Johnson, all I have to say is this. If you didn't like Luke Skywalker's characterization in The Last Jedi, that's completely fine. But stop blaming Rian Johnson. He found Luke Skywalker right where J.J. Abrams and Larry Kasdan left him. And I'm not just talking about the island of Ahhhh. I believe the precursors that gave birth to the Luke Skywalker we met in The Last Jedi were well established in the backstory of The Force Awakens. Now, a lot of people got upset with the fact that Luke went into seclusion. A lot of people think Luke would never run away from a fight. He would never give up. Okay, but isn't it well established that the running away and hiding is kind of the Jedi way up to this point in the story? After Order 66, Obi-Wan and Yoda both go into hiding. Now, I'm not saying they were cowards. I'm not saying that there's any indication that they were less heroic. They were dealing with incredible circumstances, and I think so was Luke. So I don't understand why we were surprised when Luke does it. And instead of Luke doing it out of fear or some kind of guilt, no one even stops to consider that he did it because, to the best of his knowledge, he was the last of his kind. Now, I'm not saying definitely that this was the character motivation for going into hiding. I have nothing to support that. But I bring it up because I never heard anyone else raise the possibility. Everyone tends to default to Luke would never give up. And I get that. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. You know, before I started this podcast, I was fairly isolated from others who shared in my nerdy passions. But now that I have Meanwhile in my life, I'm coming into contact with thousands and thousands of like-minded people. And one of the things I find in some is a resistance to realism in spec fiction. And Star Wars is a good case of that. It's a space where I must say I see it the most often. A lot of people just want their heroes to be heroes, somewhat almost infallible or superhuman in their actions. And I think there's a perfectly human reason for expecting this. Heroes like Luke Skywalker are so beloved that they imprint on us. And when we witness our most iconic heroes get knocked down, but they can't get back up, or they don't get back up, maybe, just maybe, we fear we might just lay down with them when we are faced with a daunting challenge or obstacle. And that is just life, isn't it? We've all had moments where something was just too much for us and we just stopped. Either we just didn't have it in us to keep going, or we decided that to keep going wasn't in our best interest. And that is completely okay. And I think fans, honestly, their reaction was just because they couldn't handle seeing Luke Skywalker do this. And I think that it was like, in some way, some sense of transference. I'm not saying for everybody, obviously, but I think that in some cases, this is kind of what led to a lot of the criticism of this particular character. And I think that kind of snowballed. And, you know, we live in a society where mob mentality is a really real thing. It doesn't really pay to be an individual anymore these days. So I think that also may have kind of played into it. I'm not saying that the fans don't have legitimate grievances about how they feel Rian Johnson treated Luke Skywalker. I'm sure they can make a very compelling argument. But I got to say, you know, I love the fact that Rian, he wrote Luke to be human for once. But I guess, honestly, how you feel about this specifically comes down to the individual. You know, I don't expect you to, you know, adapt to my way of thinking. That's not why I'm saying this. It's just, that's my analysis of the situation. You can feel however you want, but maybe, just maybe, this is a part of it, right? I don't know. Now, let's examine what may have led to informing the Luke Skywalker character we saw in The Last Jedi. But to properly do that, we have to go back a ways. Before he established the new Jedi Order and Temple where he taught Ben Solo as a student. Not a lot of people know this, but it's been told through video games and I think comics. Luke spent a lot of time traveling the galaxy looking for knowledge and artifacts that the Jedi may have left behind. He knew he wanted to start a new Jedi Order, so he ventured out into the galaxy to try and find whatever he could to complement and supplement the knowledge that was already passed on to him by Yoda and Obi-Wan. But before he starts his temple, I think he finds a few rare Jedi artifacts. I think that's the extent of it, the best of it. Maybe some books and a few holocrons. So Luke is enthusiastically ready to open his temple, and he begins training. And this is obviously when Snoke begins seducing Ben Solo, using the memory of his grandfather and telling him how Luke will eventually turn on him because he's threatened by his power. This is all information we get from the comics, by the way. If you haven't read The Rise of Kylo Ren, it's a must. And as we see in The Last Jedi, Luke does eventually turn against Ben. And in this scene, which I'm going to play for you right now, he's recounting the events of the night that he confronted Ben in his bedroom hut or whatever it is. So let's check that out.
I saw darkness. I'd sensed it building in him. I'd seen it in moments during his training. But then I looked inside, and it was beyond what I ever imagined. Snoke had already turned his heart. He would bring destruction and pain and death at the end of everything I love because of what he will become. And for the briefest moment of pure instinct, I thought I could stop it. It passed like a fleeting shadow. And I was left with shame. And with consequence. And the last thing I saw were the eyes of a frightened boy whose master had failed him.
Now, we heard audio of Luke basically recounting what happened, but there's 3 different visual takes on this scene. There's Ben's take, there's Luke's take, and there's the half-ass take at the beginning where Luke said that Kylo had turned on him, where, you know, the first cut, Luke has no lightsaber and Ben just pulls the roof down on him very quickly. And then in Kylo's version, Luke looks like he is just possessed with murderous rage. He's got a lightsaber in his hands and he's ready to strike down and kill Ben Solo, and Ben defends himself. But it's a very different Luke Skywalker than what we get to see in the last take, which is Luke going through a range of emotions from, you know, seeing the darkness in his nephew and making the decision that he's going to do something about it, that he's going to take action, he's going to give into his instincts, and he's going to kill him. But just as suddenly as that feeling comes on him, it also dissipates and falls away very quickly. And we see Luke with a moment of shame and regret. The scene that I just played you was from the third take, which is the one where Luke, he later regrets his actions. And that's when Ben Solo wakes up and sees Luke standing over him, poised to kill him with his lightsaber. Now, the Rise of Kylo Ren comic book series starts from this moment. When we first see Ben Solo, he's standing in front of Luke's Jedi Temple as it's set ablaze. But a few pages later, we learn that Ben had nothing to do with the fire at the temple. Out of nowhere, as Ben Solo looked upon this storm cloud gathering overhead, a lightning strike blew up the temple and set it ablaze. Now, I think this was presumably Snoke/Palpatine. Now, one of the criticisms of The Last Jedi was the moment where Luke intended to kill Ben Solo as he slept. Now, remember, Snoke has been telling Ben Solo that Luke is jealous of him, that he's threatened by him, that Skywalker will undermine him, and that Luke will eventually turn against him. Now, I do agree with fans that this was uncharacteristic for the Luke Skywalker that we knew, as far as giving into his instincts and acting upon his anger, especially when he saw the goodness in his father. This was uncharacteristic, for sure. Which is why I think, and stay with me on this, this is going to be this may be a long shot, but I'm starting to find more things to kind of reinforce this theory I have. I really think Luke was under Snoke and Palpatine's influence. He was under the influence long enough to create a catalytic event that would give Snoke/Palpatine exactly what he wanted, which was Ben Solo. Now think about it. Let's go to that flashback and unpack it, okay? Luke stands above Ben Solo. He's reaching inside him and he can see the darkness. He can see the destruction and the pain that will come in the wake of Ben Solo. He draws his lightsaber, he ignites it, and he stands there. And like Luke says to Rey, everything he was feeling, his fear of Ben and his desire to kill, just happens to pass. Coincidentally, mere seconds before Ben Solo awakens, to see him standing above, about to strike. I'm not buying this was Luke. I think when Johnson wrote this scene, he already had it in his head that off screen, Snoke Palpatine has put all the pieces in place and set these events in motion with such precision and timing. Like Palpatine only does. This is what Palpatine does. He is a master strategist. He's done this in the prequel trilogy. He did this in the original trilogy. And of course, he's going to do it in the sequel trilogy. So I'm going to take you through what I think happened in steps, okay? Step 1. Palpatine Snoke stokes Luke's fear, manipulating him to see a darkness in Ben Solo that may be less than what it is or may not even be there at all. Step 2. He starts telling Ben Solo that his uncle is threatened by his power. He will undermine him. He will hold him back. He is starting to chip away at the relationship and the confidence that Ben Solo has in his uncle Luke. Step 3. Snoke eventually tells Ben Solo that Luke will eventually try and kill him. And I don't think that Ben buys this right away, obviously. I think maybe it lingers in the back of his mind, but I don't think he's buying this wholesale. I think it's something that he probably struggled with. Step 4. Snoke Palpatine intensifies Luke's fear of Ben, driving him into his bedroom, his hut, and he manufactures whatever Luke needs to see to get him to react the way that he desired him to react, which is to kill Ben Solo. Now, step 5. Just as Luke is prepared to strike, he releases his hold on Luke. Now, step 6. Snoke awakens Ben Solo at the perfect moment, just as his uncle is standing above him with the lightsaber, which could be totally interpreted as my uncle's trying to kill me. He basically set it up so Ben would see that Luke is doing exactly what Snoke said he would do, try to kill him. Now, of course, Ben defends himself. The temple is destroyed, and Ben leaves to join Snoke. Given the timing of Luke's fear and desire and his instinct to kill Ben passing, just as Ben wakes up to see him poised to kill him, I would offer that there is no other logical explanation as to why Luke would want to kill Ben. And this becomes only more evidence once you read the comics and you see the extent of Snoke Palpatine's powers, his reach, his manipulation. That lightning storm that sets a temple ablaze comes out of nowhere. And at the exact moment Ben Solo has defeated Luke. Why? I would proffer because Snoke Palpatine wanted Luke to think that Ben destroyed the temple himself. Now, I think Luke is completely unaware of that Snoke Palpatine was influencing him. So, of course, he's going to blame himself. After his confrontation with Ben and the destruction of the temple, he's traumatized. He's consumed with guilt. And he has this crushing sense of failure. And to compound things, this is his own nephew. You know, he's a legend for bringing his father back from the dark side. So he's got to be asking himself, why couldn't he do the same for his own, this member of his family? And not only does he fail to save Ben Solo, but in his mind, he's also failed Han and Leia, his best friend and his sister. Turning his nephew Ben turning to the dark side, what happened at the temple, the slaughtering of his students, Luke Skywalker is without a doubt at the lowest point he's ever been in his life. And this happens to him as a master. I imagine that it'd be pretty tough for him to come back from that. And I really think Luke is feeling more than a personal sense of failure or a personal sense of accountability. I think some part of him is starting to question the tenets of the Jedi, that something is broken, that there is something inherent in the culture of the Jedi Order that continues to let his pupils be seduced by the dark side, which naturally leads to this disillusionment, this disenfranchisement with the traditional Jedi, the traditional teachings of the Jedi Order. And, you know, we get told that he leaves to go find the first Jedi temple. And I think he finds the temple and he begins digesting and studying the ancient Jedi texts, which I think help him see the history of the galaxy and the role of the Jedi through a new lens, a new POV, you know, and again, we're talking about what's informed this character, where Rian Johnson got the got the subtext to inform this character. And I think this is a lot of it. He begins to see the Jedi Order as too stringent and too rigid. And he begins to see their own hubris, their arrogance. And let's face it, it's flat out hypocrisy. Remember this line? A Sith only deals in absolutes. Well, if you ask me, the Jedi's dealt in a few absolutes themselves. And Luke eventually comes to this huge epiphany that the Jedi Order were false idols, that their legacy was failure. And I think this is the point where Luke shuts himself off from the Force. And, he realized that he's just been perpetuating the same mistakes that the Jedi made. And I think here is where the guilt just continues to compound and become heavier on him. And this leads to a deeper sense of isolation. He becomes more recluse, more broken, and less like the Luke Skywalker we know. And I think Rian was writing Luke to be human with some sense of realism. So when you consider his disillusionment, his detachment from the Jedi, all this crippling guilt, his sense of failure to not only his family, but the galaxy, his trauma, and finally an extended period of isolation, I would confidently argue that the Luke Skywalker we got was pitch perfect. Unless you were looking for some kind of novelty heroism, character with no true emotions, no true psyche or motivations. And last but not least, I want to talk about Luke's death, or what I prefer to refer to as Luke's ultimate sacrifice. He had no way of getting off the island to join the fight, to join the battle, to fight the First Order. And honestly, I don't really buy that bullshit we saw in The Rise of Skywalker, where we saw Rey pull the X-Wing from the waters around Ahhhh and fly out to Exegol. No way that X-Wing flies mechanically. I'm sorry, that's not believable. Fucking impossible. I guess JJ may have given Rey a really big bag of rice to soak up all that moisture. Okay, back to Luke. So, for the first time ever, we get to see him do something with the Force that is on par with some of the things that we've read in Legends. He projects himself across the galaxy to create, and the sole effort costs him his life. And how about that final scene with him looking out on the twin suns? Just absolutely poetic. And, I think some of the the more vehement critics of The Last Jedi, the really hardcore detractors, they say that Luke was portrayed with this, with a sense of despair and pessimism. And that's not really what I get from this portrayal at all, given the fact that he sacrifices himself just to ensure that the Resistance and Rey, the Rey being the last Jedi, and the forces of good will live to fight the fascists another day. He sacrifices himself for that. So I don't know how someone can say that. Even Mark Hamill himself thought that he wasn't this symbol of hope and optimism that he's been historically. And I gotta disagree with him. How can someone say, and as much as I love him, even Mark Hamill, that Luke wasn't a symbol of hope and optimism in The Last Jedi? If it wasn't for his intervention, hope would have literally died that day. And honestly, Luke went out like a real straight gangster, a beacon of hope, a goddamn legend. And that's one of the reasons I love this film, is the way that it ends. I think it was a poetic ending for Luke. I really do. I think that I'm a big fan of how it ended, and whether you love, and whether you share my love for The Last Jedi or you are among its detractors, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you are one of the detractors, I hope you might see this film through a new lens now. The lens I think, the lens that I think was intended, and a lens that I think that was ultimately clouded by a lack of comprehension and the complexity and the ambiguity of the subtext. And on this episode, all we've really focused on is Luke. But I have so many other amazing things to say about this film. And there are actually some significant differences in the novelization. I don't know if you guys know that. In the Last Jedi novelization, Luke changed his mind. He decided to go with Rey, to confront Kylo, possibly even to fight Snoke. In the novelization, Luke realizes he made the wrong decision and he descends from the mountain in that brainstorm that we see in the film, calling out to Rey, trying to tell her that he's going to go with her, but she can't hear him due to the wind and the rain. But when he reaches the hut and he sees Rey and Kylo in their little Force time call, he reconsiders, and that is when they have their little exchange in their sparring match. Sadly, that little nuanced moment, Luke second-guessing himself and his refusal to help Rey, was not delivered to the audience of The Last Jedi. But maybe we'll expand on that in a later episode. Some of my co-hosts really don't like this film, and I would love to hear some of the reasons why. Anyways, if you'd like to share your thoughts, drop me a note through our Instagram or Twitter at meanwhile_pod. But before I sign off, if you guys could do me a huge favor and just head over to Podchaser, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a review, that would be amazing. And if you have any like-minded friends that share your passion for everything geek, we really hope you'll tell them about our show. Send them a link. Let them check out a couple episodes. We'd really, really, really appreciate it. And if we have any WandaVision fans listen to this episode, I got some exciting news for you guys. The Meanwhile crew, we're going to be having a live WandaVision finale watch party. It's obviously going to be virtual. And we're still working out the details as to what platform we're going to be hosting it on. But if you stay tuned to our Instagram or our Twitter, meanwhile_pod, you can get all the details once they become available. So we'd love to see you there. We're going to obviously discuss the finale. We're going to have, it's going to be interactive. Fans are going to be able to talk to us and ask questions. And we're going to give away a bunch of cool WandaVision shit. So hopefully you guys will show up for that. Anyways, I'm going to sign off here. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Frank Maguire. Peace.